Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 13, Deep Knowledge Track, Falling Dominoes.
I think we're about as full as we're going to get, and everybody's been sitting here patiently long enough. This presentation, part of the deep knowledge, Falling Dominoes. Going to be an in-depth look at Lotus notes and domino-based security vulnerabilities. My name's Chris Goggins, and I'm here with Kevin McPeak and Wouter Akema. They're from Trust Factory. I'm from Security Design International. And over the next, well, that's going to be Guy over there, I suppose. And I could sit here and go like that, but okay. One, two.
I think this one's on.
Well. All right. Okay. Is that any better? So I'll stand over here and pretend. Oh, now you turn that one on. I see what you're doing. Okay, here, you guys hold on to that one. I'll stand over here. Is this on? Yep. Test, test, test. Okay. How about now? Can everybody hear? All you bad kids in the back of the room, you can hear? Okay. Go ahead and pop it up to the next one, Wouter. The basic format of this talk is going to sort of go in a couple of different parts. Start off with a quick introduction, then sort of go into straight into Lotus notes and domino security, covering a whole range of vulnerabilities. Some of them known, some of them documented, most of them not known or documented. Done this presentation a couple of times before. First time was at Black Hat last year, or at DEF CON last year rather, and since then everybody's missed the point of the vulnerabilities. No one's fixed the vulnerabilities. Everybody's ignored the vulnerabilities. So that sort of leads us into the second part, where I'm going to conveniently leave the state and our friends from Holland over here will show you why these things are a problem. So after that, leave it open for discussion, arrest warrants, what have you. So just to start off, in setting a lot of this stuff up, Trust Factory's main objective in doing a lot of things is to establish trust between objects on networks or what have you, but to verify that they're really true. And in sort of doing this, they're doing some work on Lotus notes, which is their primary specialty. And in digging around within notes, discovered some things that looked a little odd. About that time, an old high school friend of mine, Kevin McPeak, called me up and said, "Hey, we've got this stuff, and it looks pretty serious, but we want someone to take a look at it just to make sure that we're all not insane." And that's where I stepped in from Security Design International. We decided to say, yeah, we'll go in there, we'll take a look at it, and lo and behold, these guys had found some stuff which basically renders Lotus notes useless. Now, a lot of stuff that you'll read in the press will lead you to believe that you have to have physical access, it can't be done remotely, you have to have supreme knowledge of programming skills and in-depth little bits and bytes inside Lotus notes, and that's just not true. With some very basic disassembly, people can very easily figure out some of the stuff that was discovered, and with a lot of extra playing and learning about Lotus script and other things, you can make notes do some really horrible things. So at DEF CON, we did this presentation, and it created a lot of stir. And at that point, our goal was to disclose everything, but not give away the tools. Still not giving away the tools, because we figure anybody who wants to take the time to research this can figure it out based upon what we've said and the white paper that we'll be writing, hopefully this weekend. So, sort of the difference between your typical CERT advisory and complete, unfettered, reckless disclosure. During the time of doing this, we'd actually talked to Lotus, engaged them in multiple dialogues, tried to explain the seriousness of their vulnerabilities, and what basically ended up happening was Lotus went into spin doctor mode, where the IBM PR people just sort of put out a bunch of releases and some stuff that basically said, oh yeah, well, this isn't really a problem and here's why. But none of that's true. And we'll explain that, and you'll see why that is as we go into the talk. So, okay. So for those of you who don't know, I can't imagine that you'd be in here if you didn't know what Lotus Notes was, but for those of you who just staggered it out of the cold, Lotus Notes is basically a secure groupware application. It's got email, it's got database functionality, it's got a web interface, it's got a lot of neat things that sort of make it easy for a lot of people to share information off of a particular server. It's got its own development language, it's got its own scripting language, it has hooks into C with its own API, it can make calls directly native from Microsoft using Olay, it supports JavaScript, it supports a lot of different things. So it's a very, very powerful tool that you can use to do a lot of complex operations on databases without having to be some sort of super high-level DBA. Now, to give you an idea about how big Lotus Notes is, there's about 60 million corporate users worldwide. And, Lotus Notes has never been really that sexy for people to go attack, mainly because Lotus has announced it from the beginning as this is a secure operating platform. It has RSA encryption natively embedded in the communications protocol between the client and the server. It's got strong authentication and good non-repudiation of data and all sorts of stuff. So no one really took a poke at it. Everybody just took it, at face value, saying, oh well, if they've incorporated public key into it, well then it's probably going to be kind of hard to break. Well, they implemented it wrong. Now, the major releases, 4.5, 4.6, and 5.0. It's up to 5.06a, right? Yep. To give you an idea about some of the places that you'll find notes, and this sort of drives home about how serious these problems are. In the government, since it meets the defense messaging requirements, the government uses it. You'll find it in most military agencies. You'll find it in most state and federal government bodies. The CIA is the world's largest user of Lotus Notes to keep track of things, including stuff like open case files and things of this nature. Most major multinational corporations use it. A lot of people use it primarily for email, but a lot of people are also doing all sorts of stuff with the database functionality. For example, in banking and accounting, a lot of people will set up databases that using notes so that people can update forms and submit particular values or fill out basic things having to do with customer financials and what have you. I just left a large company in Florida just a few days ago where I was doing the consulting engagement. They use notes so that all of their people in the field can fill out incident reports, do payroll tracking and what have you. All of that was controlled by notes. So everybody uses it, but it just never got that sexy. You don't really see that many people trying to attack it. Now, again, the reason people went to Notes in the first place is because Notes was touted as a secure operating environment. As I said before, they implemented public key. It's got its own basic PKI structure that provides strong authentication so that when you're logging in with your Notes ID, it's doing a basic key exchange, and so you're really doing a secure authentication. And it's got encryption built in using the same functionality so that your database is going to be protected from prying eyes, ostensibly. It also has different levels of access control, down to the tune of you can have server-based access control, you can have document-based access control, you can have even individual fields or views in a particular document can be restricted to certain people. So it has a really, really high level of granularity that you can get to when you want to try to block people from looking at certain things. And because of the way it's used and because of who its client base are, a lot of people said, well, gee, if the CIA uses it, it must be secure, because certainly they would have taken a look at it a little bit. So it's enjoyed for a long time a very, very strong reputation for being secure. Now, just to give you an idea about what things it runs on, Release 4 ran on basically everything that you could put it on. Release 5, they've sort of knocked down the clients they've stopped development on clients for OS2 and Sun Solaris, probably because there just wasn't that big of a market anymore, focusing primarily now on the Windows environment for clients. On the server side, pretty much dropped support for NetWare and OS2, again, trying to focus primarily on the Windows side, but still continuing on with Unix-based support as well as support for AS400s. Now, what you'll see for some of the attacks that occur, server really doesn't matter. You could be running your server on an MVS on an OS 390 system, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the attacks that we'll demonstrate, it's irrespective of whatever server the thing's running on. It all has to do with the way that you connect to it with the client that you're using. Now to sort of do a handoff here, the first part of our two-part series is broken into two parts, if that makes any sense. That should probably say part A and part B, but you'll get the basic idea. Kevin's going to talk a little bit about the basic functionality of node security, starting off with access control lists and how those are applied or misapplied in most cases. Talk about the construction of server IDs and user IDs, as well as the passwords associated with them. Talk about things that are vulnerable within the Domino portion, the HTTP web server, and talk about some of the fields that exist in the names and address book and what you can do with them. Then Wouter's going to pick it up and talk about some more advanced attacks using stored forms, talk about bypassing Lotus Notes execution control list by making your own particular kinds of attacks, talk about the Lotus Notes password hash and how that can be broken, and then talk about how to steal people's identities using Lotus Notes. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Okay. All right. Can y'all hear me okay with this? Okay. If y'all want this, you feel free to grab it. How many of y'all are actually running Lotus Notes? Or how many of you actually have done consultancy against somebody who's got notes? Okay. Do y'all, how often do y'all actually check the access control list? Do y'all do that frequently on all the databases? No one. Okay. I actually asked this question at DEF CON, and we only had one guy who raised his hand. This is really crucial, and now I understand. I really, to steal a quote from somebody, I really feel your pain in checking the access control list and notes. I know it's extremely time-consuming task because they don't really have a really good interface on how to do that en masse. In Release 5, the administration client, it is kind of improved. It's still got its problems. But since Notes comes with a possibility of having up to 58 default databases installed, this is really crucial. And this is one of the things in doing our research that we're just seeing time and time and time again. People are just leaving this stuff wide open for a variety of reasons. Everything from, the server was used as a staging server or a development server and got slammed into production. So the ACL databases didn't get checked while all the databases were actually being developed by developers. And we all know how the developers like to have their access. But we see this again and again, and this goes for all the databases. And I don't think that one of the things that we've tried to really nail everyone down on is that there is so much information in each one of these databases, which is really crucial to protecting your environment, or from an attacker's perspective, really crucial for footprinting the server. Go ahead. Now, in regards to some of these databases, we've got a couple of examples up here, and these are, believe it or not, the names and address book, as it was called in Release 4. In Release 5, they've changed the terminology, and it's now called the directory. It's the same thing. It's the same database. It's the names.nsf database. And I would probably dare to say that about 60% of all the servers I look at, this database is at least readable across the internet. Using a standard web browser, I don't need a notes client. I can actually just, since it's in the default data directory, I don't have to try to hunt down the path. This is really bad, and one of the why this is really bad is that this is where all your user information, your server information, communication profiles between the servers and between different notes networks, all this is actually stored in that one database. One of the things that Wouter is going to do a demonstration later on is you'll actually see how we can actually recover information in user ID files or server ID files from this database. If it's readable, we can pull anything from that database. Another one, and I think that this one is a really nasty one, which I'm going to do a little demonstration on here in a little bit, which is the catalog database. If you're not familiar with the catalog databases, I don't want to give you a course in Lotus, how Lotus Notes administration, but the catalog database will actually stores references to where all the individual other databases are actually located at. Now in Release 5, they've gone a bit further to try to aid administrators, and they're actually storing access control information in that database. So if I can read this database, I can actually find out where the databases are in the file system. So if somebody's moved a database 3 directories down, nested it several directories down, I can look in this one single database, find out exactly where it is and what access control rights are set to it. So I know which ones now to target. The DOM config database, I think it was Loft that had actually done this a couple of years ago in Release 4, and this is not quite so important for Release 5, but there's still a lot of 4 servers, Release 4, Release 4.5, and Release 4.6 servers, which have this wide open. And this actually allows administrators, or if it's wide open, somebody to use a web browser to create virtual servers on your Dominoes server, if it's running as a web server. The log.nsf. This is another one that we see often a lot. This is the same thing as your system logs under Unix or under NT. This stores all the information, everything that Dominoes server is doing. Everything, even direct output from the server console, is stored in here. And if this is open, if it's writable, somebody who's attacking your Dominoes server can cover his tracks. What we've actually seen is there's this, and we actually don't have it up here, and we should add this, is there's another database which stores HTTP request logs for the web server, and that's called the domlog.nsf. And typically when we are actually doing incident response or something, usually what attackers will do will just flood these 2 databases to the point of where they corrupt the database because it runs out of space on the file system. And usually you start talking about databases that range from 2 to 4 gigs by this time. So we've actually seen this a lot, and actually this actually happened with the Dutch police, where they got hacked, and the way they hacked them was they actually overrode, just flooded their domlog database, and it just ended up something massive, and even the police couldn't open up the database anymore. It's completely corrupted. Server ID. This one is a really controversial one. And the reason it's controversial is because Lotus and Lotus documentation, it actually will talk about having automatic restarts of the Dominoes server. And the reason you have this is if the Dominoes server crashes in Release 5, there's some new features in there which Domino, the parent process, will try to kill off all the children process and restart itself after a crash. Other type of scenarios where you might have is actually a hardware watchdog on your server. So so that's actually polling the Dominoes server and the operating system, and if it sees a crash on one of those, it will actually either restart the Dominoes server or the whole operating system. Now to do this in the ID file, there's 2 ways to do this. One is to put no password on the server ID file. The other way to do it, which we're starting to see, now that people are putting passwords on the server ID files, they still want the automatic restart. And you can actually feed the password to the server at startup by using a name pipe. So they've got the password stored in a clear text file on the file system, and they're redirecting that through a pipe when they start the server process to get it running. And that just kind of defeats the whole purpose of having the password in the first place. And what we like to recommend, or what we tell everybody, if you're really concerned about the uptime of your server, then you need to make sure that those passwords are in those ID files and install some clustered servers. Now, that's not always the cheapest option, but if that's what you're going for, that's basically what you're going to be faced with. And one of the reasons why this is really so important, I don't think a lot of people understand this. If I can retrieve that server ID file, and this is actually possible with the directory traversal exploit, which came out not too long ago. Anyone can retrieve that ID file. And because people take the defaults when they install a server, they take the default file name for the ID file, which is server.id. They don't bother to rename it. Or if they rename it after the name of their note server, which is web server 01. So it becomes very easy to find out what the file name of this ID file is and retrieve that. The notes ID file is actually, the whole notes infrastructure is actually based on, I'm sorry, if you didn't hear his question, you were asking what how the ID file is actually based. It's actually based on a public key infrastructure, very similar to PGP. We'll go a little bit more into detail about that later on, if you can just hold on, because we're going to do some stuff with the ID files, and we'll go farther into that. But it is very similar to PGP or something, or PKI. So if I can actually retrieve that file from the server ID file, I can now go off and create my own server using your ID file and start replicating with your other Dominoes servers and start pulling databases across. And once I have them local, those databases are mine for the taking. And it doesn't actually, and this is something that's also kind of a misconception. If you encrypt your database on your server, when I go off and make a new replica, it actually decrypts it and sends me the information unencrypted. So when I'm storing that new replica, unless I've chosen the option to encrypt that database, it won't come to me encrypted. So this is how we can get around in this when we're doing security evaluations. Now here's something that a lot of you may have actually seen. We didn't actually discover a lot of these, but they are out there and they are important, and a lot of people aren't taking them seriously. And this is where we can use a Dominoes server that's running the web server process and do various different attacks using crafted URL constructs. And I'm sure you've probably seen the first couple, the $open. Now, Lotus Notes actually did fix this. This was fixed in the Domino Release 5, because in previous versions, in 4.5 and 4.6, it used to come along, and the default was so that you could actually browse the entire file system of the Domino server in the data directory. They did turn that off by default, but we're still seeing this in Release 5 servers. And our only assumption that we can make on that is that during the development process, people are turning that back on and they're forgetting to go back and check this. And so their server is completely browsable across the internet. And we can just click and pick which databases we want to try to access. So this is a really bad thing. You need to make sure that this is directory browsing is turned off. The $default nav question open navigator, you actually don't have to have the question mark open navigator. Just the $default nav is enough. This will actually allow you to bypass any customized views in a notes database. If a developer has gone off and created some special views, a view for graphic developers or graphic people, and another view for anonymous users, another view for salespeople, all over the web interface. Using this, you can bypass all those. And going back to the default navigator, and we'll show this to you here in a little bit, you can actually then point and click and choose which view you want to look at and see documents in there which weren't actually meant for your eyes. We see this a lot. An example would be like a headhunter who's got a website. He's got a mail-in database where people can actually send in an email. For those of you who don't know, a mail-in database is basically just a standard notes database that's receiving emails. The emails get sent into the mail-in database and are automatically processed by an agent. It detaches the attachments of the email and stores those in notes documents for later retrieval from somebody internal in the organization. Those types of databases, like the example I'm using with a headhunter, they've got this on a web server, and somebody could go along and start plucking those documents out. A competing headhunter could start retrieving those documents, the resumes of all these other people which have signed up with this one headhunter. So this is a really bad thing to have. There's actually ways to filter this out. If you're not sure, if you don't know about this, one of the things you can do to filter this out is to go into a file it's a text file that's in the data directory. It's called httpd.cnf. And you can actually use that. That's where your MIME associations actually are stored. And you can actually create a filter that redirects to a document that says you're not allowed to use this construct, this URL construct. And that's a really good way of filtering this out. You can also use that same filter for the directory traversal, which is right underneath there. If you haven't seen this directory traversal, this actually affects everything up till 5.6 or 5.6a. Well, I think they fixed it in 5.6a. I have to actually go check.
Yeah, there's the only fix is the workaround.
Yeah, the proposed fix is the ACPD plan.
Yeah? Okay. All right, so, well, then you need to go in there and actually create an entry in that httpd.cnf file. And you should actually have everything that we've got listed up here in that file already filtering out and redirecting to a page which is keeping people from performing these commands. Because there's no legitimate use for any of these URL constructs. With the exception of the directory traversal, these are actually considered by Lotus to be features. And we can't really find a valid use for these features. So you need to make sure you're filtering these out. The bottom one, the view $read view entries. This is a really interesting one. I don't think too many people are really familiar with yet. This will actually allow you to retrieve the entire database in an XML parsed response. So if I actually open up a database with that query, or I open up even a view, I will get all the information parsed back in XML. And this really becomes interesting because with the XML, you can actually find information quicker and navigate through the structure of the database with fewer requests going to the web server. This is also very interesting because most administrators, going back to the DOM log, which is the logging file for the web server, what a lot of administrators actually do are build customized views for different types of requests. They'll actually filter out, because they'll only want to see how many actual hits they're actually getting and which pages they're looking at. They don't necessarily want to see all the JPEGs and everything else. So they'll make a filter in there for their view, which will say, just show me only a view of only HTML request, HTML and HTML documents. So that thereby excludes JPEGs, GIFs, Java classes, anything like that, because that's not so interesting to an administrator who wants to see how many hits he's got. By doing the XML request, you can just peruse the database, and since you're actually requesting XML, this won't show up in his view of his DOM log. So he won't actually even know that you're running around through databases on his web server.
You can do a thing of that? Or?
Yeah, we're going to come to it here in a little bit. I'm going to do a demonstration on this. Database issues. Here again, going back to something I said a little bit earlier. The user IDs. This is a really, really nasty one. And as I said earlier, Walter's going to show some stuff with this. One of the reasons why these user IDs end up in the names and address book is because notes administrators already have a pretty rough job as it is. They're having to create new users, depending upon the size of the organization. If it's a pretty large one, they're probably having to create a couple of new users every week. One of the features of Domino, or of the Notes client, is when you're registering a user, you have a choice of where do you want to store the ID file, on your file system or in the names and address book. And this is actually a feature from Lotus Notes, and the principal idea behind it is that by storing it in the names and address book, you can just go to your new employee and say, you know, there's the installer on the NetWare file server, just go run that, fill in your name, follow the little prompt boxes, and you'll get your ID file then. And what Notes actually goes off and does is when he does run the installer, it will query him for his username. So he'll type in Chris Goggins at SDI. They don't use Notes, by the way. But he'll fill out his name, and Notes will go off in the name and address book and look for the ID file and retrieve that and ask him where does he want to deposit that on his local file system. And this is a handy feature for internal administration until you get to an environment that has a shared installation between external and internal environments. And this is where it gets really bad, because the name and address book is up there on the web, and it's... Do we need to call an ambulance? No. You okay? All right. This is where this is really bad, is those ID files are presented when you actually open up the person document in the names and address book. It's right there at the bottom, and just like if you were to open up the names and address book in the Notes client, you get the same view in the web browser. Lotus has actually done a really fine job of creating the same type or a very similar interface over the web that you get with the Notes client. So it's almost really client independent. Whichever one you choose, you basically get the same information, the same functionality. And if you can see that ID file, all you have to do is click, and it will download to your local file system. The other interesting thing is this is actually also another feature. At the same time you're registering a user, you have the ability to set the HTTP password to be the same as the ID file. And this was one of the things that we released when we were at DEF CON, and we're still seeing a lot of this. We're still seeing people out there sharing the same password between the ID file and the one stored in the directory. And where this gets really bad is we've got a little tool where if those passwords are the same, we can then compromise that person's identification. Because the password, as it's stored, and actually both the directory and the ID file is using an unsalted hash. This is the same problem that Unix went through and painfully discovered 15 years ago. Windows discovered it, went through it, I think, with Loft about 5 years ago. Now Lotus is having to relearn the same lesson. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the catalog database, this is where it stores full listing of all the databases with all the current ACLs. We've got it documents the full path to the database, so we know where it's at. If we can view this database, we'll know your entire file system contents. Next slide. I kind of already talked about this one. I think I got kind of ahead of myself. Okay. We'll just whiz through these real quick. Yeah, here's another one, and this is kind of really interesting. Notes kind of has something similar to the Unix cron tab. It's called the administration request database. And administrators, and in some instances, a user can actually make a request. It has to be authorized by the administrator, but you can make a request to the administration request database. And the principal idea behind this, if you're wanting to do various tasks in a Domino environment, anything from full text indexing a database to creating new replicas, the administrator doesn't want to tie up his Notes client creating a whole bunch of new replicas from one server to another, especially when they're going across ISDN connections or low bandwidth connections. So the idea behind this is you can actually submit the request to the administration database, and then that will take care of the task that you've assigned it. Now, we're seeing that this database, again, is open on the web. This means anybody who can browse this and has write access to this can either delete the administration request in there or make up some new ones. So this is a really bad one as well. They typically run as admin. The statistics and events database, this is another one. There is some redundancy in between this and the logs, the logging databases. But what this also does is watching for different types of events. If somebody changes an ACL on a server, this is a little bit more compared to, although it does have some logging facilities in it, it's almost kind of like a miniaturized tripwire database. So you can configure to watch for particular events and take appropriate action. If an ACL is changed on a database, send an alert to the administrator. If a user's logged in with a new version client or is running an old client, send an alert or take some other appropriate action. And there's a lot of people who set up and they'll take the time and they'll go off and they'll create a whole bunch of events to watch for ACL changes and everything else, and they forget to time the ACL of this database. So then the hacker or the attacker takes a look at this database. He's got write access to it. He looks at the alerts that are triggered, just goes right down the list and deletes all of them before he starts doing a penetration. There are up to 58 possible default databases that are installed with every Dominoes server. Up to. Doesn't mean that, depends on what you're actually configuring at the installation, if you're going to be running LDAP, if you're going to be running a POP3 server. There's various ways you can configure a Dominoes server. But depending upon how you do that, decides how many default databases you're actually going to have installed. Most of those do not have the proper ACLs. And this has actually been a big issue. I believe it was also Loft about 3 years ago who made a small advisory about this, discussing having the proper ACLs. Although theirs was more catered towards the DOM config database, Lotus actually only tackled that one database. They didn't bother to go back and look at their default installation or default ACLs of all the other databases. And Lotus, like all these big companies, Microsoft as well, are massive marketing machines. They want you to get in the driver's seat of their software and take it for a test drive before you actually deploy it. So that's why everything's wide open during the install. They don't actually mean for you to go out and run it this way. That is not the intention. But people are doing this. And I would dare to say, out of 75% of all the systems out there, we can get through most of them just using a standard web browser. All right, I'm just going to give you a very quick little puny demonstration here. Let me explain what we've got here. We kind of had to tone it down. We have a serious lack of laptops in our company. We tend to be too hardcore users for those. So we actually brought a machine all the way from Holland. It's got everything on it. We are actually running a Release 5 server on here, a 503. Over here we've actually got just a little Linux 586 dinky thing with hardly anything on here. But I just wanted to show this just as kind of a little proof of concept, what we can actually do. Now what we are actually going to do, and what I was talking about earlier, the catalog database, there's all sorts of information in there which is extremely valuable. And what we can do is actually, I think I still have this. Is the server running?
It is, yeah.
Okay. What we're going to do is I've got a little script here which is, yeah, pull up the server console. Just to let them see. One of the things on the server console, if you're doing a request on there and you actually request something that's not there, you don't have access to, if you're requesting a notes database, you'll actually see errors come up. So if you're trying to find notes databases that might or might not be installed, let's say just the DOM log, and you're trying to figure out if they actually even have the DOM log turned on and have a DOM log database, it will actually produce errors coming up on the server console screen that you'll actually see here. And to give you an example, I'll just do this real quick. What I'll do is I'll request a database that's not actually even there, just so you can see this error message, because you're ugly. Oh crap, excuse me, I don't even have Netcat on here. This is how slimmed down this system is. Yeah, okay, we'll just do it here.
The web browser.
So if we actually request this, you see on the server screen, at the very bottom line, the file does not exist. So this will actually tip off an administrator that's watching the console or is looking through the log.nsf. This will actually show up there in the log.nsf database. It'll come up because the log.nsf actually logs the server console, and he'll see somebody was actually trying to probe for databases which may or may have not been there. So using a little script here, which is instead going to request an XML produced document from the catalog database. If you now look over here, you're going to see a whole bunch of fun stuff come up. And this is the XML, and I've just parsed it out to make it more readable. You've got the name of the catalog database. I'm actually going to stop this. This is going to produce a whole ton of stuff. But I want to give you a description of what you got here. This is actually, right here is the notes server, or the notes database name. And then down here is the actual database file name and the path. And in this case, this is actually a database template. And what I'm doing is I'm actually parsing the XML, and I'm actually adding a little bit of stuff in here. So if I was running this, say, under GNOME, under Linux, and a GNOME terminal, that would even be clickable, and that's how quickly I could go into a notes database. So I could click in that and pop it open in Netscape and go right to it. This is also the notes ID right here of that database, or the replica ID of the database. And we also get the creation date and time of the database, which server it is on. And the reason that this is important is because in various environments, it's common that one environment will share one massive catalog database. So although we could request this information from, in this case, the WinNT server, this might be on another server, their web server or their Solaris server, and not on the particular server that we're querying. So we would then end up with this information and know we'd have to go to a different server to get access to that database. Underneath that, you can see that anonymous is set to designer. This is pretty much a standard installation of the Dominoes server. We haven't really changed anything on here. I think maybe one or two databases for some other stuff we're going to do later. But this is all pretty much standard. And I'm actually only pulling up anything that is marked. I'm going to do this and let it run now. I'm only pulling up stuff which is set for default and anonymous access. So if we let this run, you'll see how many databases that we could actually get to in a notes environment. And this is a really slow little Linux laptop. But this is actually only issuing, also again, I'm actually retrieving all this information from three HTTP requests. So we're not having to create a flurry of entries in their Dominoes server log that would tip off an administrator. And in all likelihood, he's actually got everything but HTML requests filtered out anyway. So he'll never actually see this unless he's very aware of this and is going off to look for this. And yeah, as you see over here, there's nothing over here on the server console. But we are getting the full path. You can actually see the different subdirectories down in here. So we know exactly where every database is on that server. Not yet. We're now discussing that internally. We're probably going to make everything available in the next few months, probably at Black Hat July. This actually isn't a patch. This isn't something really to patch for. This is just general stupidity. Don't mean to insult anybody with that, but that's, basically we've pulled up everything there that's on that server. I'm sorry? The read view entries. We can do that. Yeah. Actually, I forgot. Yeah. Yeah, access control button.
Yeah.
Netscape doesn't actually understand XML, but it will conveniently open it for us in Explorer. And there you go. That's actually all I'm parsing, and I'm just making it more readable. And everyone's familiar with what you can do with the directory traversal attack?
Show that anyway.
Yeah?
Yeah. That's really cool.
We actually were just doing it a second ago. With this, and there is a clear distinction on this. What we actually recommend, and we actually had recommended this prior before this actually came out when we're doing client consultancy, is it's typical for a lot of people to install the binaries on a separate drive, usually on C drive with where their window NT installation is, and install all the notes data directories on a RAID 5 on drive D or something. But we actually recommend that you stick the binaries on another partition on drive D and use drive E for your data directory, and that could be RAID 5 or whatever. The reason for this is in the directory traversal attack, it's actually, you can traverse the directory of where the binaries are actually installed in. So in this case, our installation here, our demo installation, we didn't quite follow our own example for this, but we actually have the binaries installed on drive C. And with that, we can actually issue the request. We'll go save it.
Yeah, to give you a basic rundown, basically, the Domino interface doesn't parse correctly any request that begins with .nsf. So by specifying something that's .nsf followed by .. /.. and then whatever directory you want to that's in that same file system. So on here, what Kevin's done is done .. /winnt/win.ini, but that could just as easily have been .. /lotus/data/ notes.ini or notes data server.id or
repair /sam.
Repair, yeah.
So you can grab SAM files.
Yeah.
Yes.
No restriction.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically anything, like I said, if the binaries are actually installed on drive C, then you can pull anything off drive C. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah, Domino actually has to be installed as the system, and it's the system user.
Now also understand that doesn't work on Unix-based servers or OS 400 or MVS-based servers. But
Yep.
most of them are NT anyway, so.
Yeah? Okay. And that's it. I'm going to hand it over. Oh, we're going to actually break.
No, that shouldn't be in there.
Oh.
That was your quick break between part 1 and part 2 of part 1.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it over to Walter now.
Soon.
Yeah, probably about at Black Hat July is when we're looking at. That's not definitive yet. We're still discussing it internally and trying to figure out. Part of the problem is that when we actually released all this stuff a year ago at DEF CON, as Chris kind of mentioned this before, we looked at this, and because the consequences of going public with all the stuff that we've done, we felt was going to cause way too much chaos out there. We do believe in full disclosure, but yet at the same time, we had to consider the CIA and everybody else is running Domino. And the reason, there's actually a good reason for this. There's actually, the Department of Defense outlined some specs. It was called the Defense Messaging System. And they were a set of requirements for anybody in the intelligence community or the DoD had to meet, or the software had to meet these specs in order to comply with the Defense Messaging System. And it was supposed to be, it's a set of standards for secure messaging and all that. There's only 2 platforms which actually meet those requirements. It may have changed in the last year. Actually, I haven't checked it, but I feel that it probably hasn't changed. And the only 2 products which met it was Trusted Solaris and Lotus Notes. And we felt that if we'd gone with full disclosure, there was too much that could have gone wrong and too many script kiddies who may have taken advantage of this. This was why we actually why we called up Chris and his company and said, let's do kind of a limited disclosure with third-party validation. So we contacted them, we sent them all the stuff they looked at, they said, sure enough, we can reproduce all this. And they stuck their name behind everything that we had discovered, and we jointly made the presentation. It, however, now has been 9 months. And Lotus really kind of, although we had informed Lotus even way before DEF CON last year.
6 months before.
Yeah, about 6 months before that all this stuff was coming out. After DEF CON, we had actually even invited them to attend at DEF CON, and they politely turned us down. But we kind of felt that we had a really good working relationship with them, and that we weren't trying to attack each other. After DEF CON, they released a whole PR and really played spin doctor, as Chris said, and they were, like, yeah, that happens, and it's not really, these are features, and blah, 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 and just really played the whole thing down. So people are still running completely vulnerable. And we're going to do in the second half of the presentation, we're really going to show you, the second half of the presentation. We're going to show you some examples of this, some real online examples of this.
Do you think it's ironic that a Dutch resident cares more about the intelligence community than I do?
I'm sorry? Yeah. Well, my father was a general in the Air Force. I have an uncle who was a former Joint Chief of Staff. So I'm sensitive to their needs and everything else. He said, it's ironic that a Dutch resident, an American resident living in Holland is more sensitive to the needs than IBM are, the security needs of the intelligence community. So yeah, I mean, I'm sensitive towards it, and Chris does a lot of government contracting as well too, and we had to kind of look at what was the best for the world and our clients, and we tried to find a balance there.
And the point was that Lotus has been given ample time, and all they've responded with was press releases rather than fixes. And you reach a point to where you say, okay, you want to work with a vendor, you want to make sure that everybody's protected and everybody can get workarounds in place before you actually go out and start releasing source code to tools that can open up any node server. Well, coming up in July, it'll be a full year. And at that point, you just kind of have to shake your head and say, well,
We
been
told
long
them.
enough. Maybe you'll take it seriously now.
So unless we can come up with some reason not to in the next couple of months before Black Hat July, we'll probably be cleaning up the source code and everything else, everything we've done up till now, and we will release it. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to Walter.
Plus the microphone back.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to sit there.
Oh, you're gonna sit there?
Stuff myself.
Okay.
So that's it.
All right, fair enough.
Thanks.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct. Well, you'll see the special stuff right now.
We're slowly building up. Be patient. You'll be glad you did. It's
a slow burn, but it has a nice crescendo.
If we just went straight into the hardcore tools for the people who's here not familiar with Notes and Domino, they would be like, what the heck are we doing? So we're trying to take it kind of slow and easy and explain a lot of the concepts behind this before we get into it.
Did you put that stuff in between, by the way? What you found on?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody can hear me? Okay. We're now going to do some stuff that, well, issue number 6 out of the 8 or 9, I believe, in total, is also a known vulnerability. And before I can explain that a bit, I have to go a little bit deeper into a Notes database structure. If you look at a Notes database structure, it basically consists of data, structured data, rich text, HTML, etc., and forms or design elements. But for the purpose of the stored form vulnerability, I will restrict it to just forms. This better?
I think he's going to turn it up. Yeah. You want to hold the mic?
That's a bit inconvenient if I start doing blah, 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 blah. This better? Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah? Okay. Thank you. So data and design elements slash forms. Forms are used to render that data in a database. Forms also consist of programmable events, such as a document open event, a post open, query open, document close, etc. And you can program either formula language, Lotus script, or Java into it. Now the deal with stored forms is as follows. Suppose you want to make data remotely available. There's a very powerful feature in Lotus Notes, and that's email. So you can email a piece of data towards a remote user. But he will have a problem in looking at that data because the form that is used to render that data is not available in his mail file. So therefore Lotus has implemented the feature of stored form where you can send off an email that consists of the data plus the form definition into it. And if you send that off to a remote user, the user can open that document with that stored form. A little bit background, the issue of the stored forms was reported in 1996. At least that's the first occurrence I could find. The vulnerability by itself is much older, I think. And I've actually found an article in Der Spiegel which dealt with it. And Lotus implemented the ACL, the Execution Control List, in release 4.5 to deal with that situation. 4 years later, well, 5 years now, what we see out there in the market is that very few people have the ACL set up properly. And almost everybody is allowing stored forms in their email. And that's dangerous. Now with release 5.02, things have become a bit different, but I'll go into that deeper later on. Another interesting thing is what Chris pointed out to me is you found in Bugtrek, what was it?
Yeah, someone put out an advisory
2
weeks ago.
That he discovered the wheel again. He said, oh gee, there's a vulnerability with stored forms in Lotus Notes. Amazing. The purpose again of stored forms is very handy in workflow applications, and it's also very handy for client administration. If you have to do something on a client, you can send off a stored form which executes particular things to modify the client install. And the problem with it is that stored form feature is enabled by default in every database that is deployed. So you have to switch it off in order to disable it. And if you program the query open event, then you end up with a situation where you can make the client perform actions without user interaction. And I think that is kind of interesting because of, what was it, Bubble Boy was the first virus that people were so frustrated about. Well, Lotus Notes had it way before. And very interesting, and I'm not sure whether that still goes for release 5, but in release 4 environments, stored forms were transmittable over SMTP. So you could basically send a stored form to any mail user that is using Notes over the internet.
No.
Exactly.
And
As
he
soon as
doesn't
you
have
open,
He doesn't even have to do anything. All he has to do is open his mail.
boom.
No
But-
clicking on attachments, no nothing. Just the mere fact of viewing that piece of mail will cause the form element to execute if you've constructed it right. And that's what Voucher's about to do.
Again, the setup, we have a 503 Domino server, and I have 3 clients. One is Mr. Inbreaker, which is Dutch for intruder. And I have a R46 user, that is a client that will act as a victim, and he's using a 4.6 Notes client. And I have another user, which is running an R5 client as a victim. Now, let me switch to the perspective of the intruder, Mr. Inbreaker. And I've prepared my homework a little by designing a form that will act as a stored form. And what I will do is create a message with that stored form, and we will fire it off against that release 4.6 user. Now, before we do that, again, the purpose of this demonstration is to show that from remote we can make him do things that we want as an attacker. At this moment, I don't have access on his mail file. His mail file is properly configured from an ACL. So if I try to look at it with a web browser, I will be prompted with a password. Yeah? And as an intruder, you don't have the username and password for this mail file. So you don't have access to it. Now there's something that can be done about it. Namely, if you send a stored form, put some stuff in here, and send that stored form to the victim. Okay? There you go. It's been sent. Now, in order to look at what's going to happen from the victim perspective, I will shut down the Node 5 client and start up a 4.6 client as the victim. I think this is his mail file. The victim has to log in. Okay, here you see he's got several other emails, but this is the email that was sent today. So now watch what happens as soon as I press enter. I only press enter to open the email, and that is something you cannot blame a user, yeah, just opening the email. So I'm going to open it. We can look at the email and it's gone. Yeah, it must have pressed delete instead of enter, because there's nothing in here. He didn't send anything, yeah, to something from December 12, but there's nothing. The email disappeared from his inbox, so nothing happened. He must have made a mistake. Let's go back to the intruder and see what the result is from this action. So I have to start up the release 5 client. Oops. And we're going to read his email. And as you can see, he just received an email from the victim. And if we open that email, what you will see is, dear audience, I have just granted manager access to the intruder. And he also attached the URL to his mail file. So if we go to that mail file now, what you will notice is that there is no longer a password required. In fact, Anonymous was managing now.
One of the important things to note about this is that this is just one simple, basic example. By using Lotus script, Voucher could have just as easily formatted the guy's hard drive, granted access to every database that this guy had access to, send every copy of that guy's email box back, or he could have sent over a copy of back orifice, executed that, and the user would never know anything. He would have never clicked on an attachment, he would have never done anything. So the whole, you can re-implement a combination of I Love You and Bubble Boy in one nasty virus targeted at Lotus Notes, and there's nothing anybody can do about it if they have stored forms turned on.
And I have to interject one thing. One of the reasons they have stored forms enabled in the Notes database is that there's a lot of third-party applications, document management, quality management systems, which are used under Lotus Notes that actually take advantage of that functionality. And it's required for document processing and everything else internal in the organization. So Lotus's response is, if you don't need, if you're worried about this, go turn off stored forms. But if you do that, then you break all these third-party applications, which you've just spent, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy from a Lotus business partner to run on your Notes environment, which was the whole idea of why you went to Notes from Exchange anyway. So.
Okay. So these were all documented and known vulnerabilities, and we've done some research ourselves as well for the past 2.5 years, and I'm going to talk about that. Well, we've dealt with this, DEF CON. What we are going to discuss is research on these areas: design elements, the bypassing of the execution control list, the F5 function key, clear user preferences, password hashing, and ID file validation. If you look at the Notes design elements, we find that they are stored in obscure locations within a Notes database. If you access design elements as regular Notes documents, then the only thing you require to manipulate the design of an application is editor access instead of designer access. Yeah. To give an example, the stored form feature that I just demonstrated is a feature that you can enable or disable on a database. Well, we discovered that it is nothing more than a lowercase f character in the $flags item of the icon document of a database. And for all mail files that are created of a single Notes template, we find that all the Note IDs for the icon documents are identical. So if you have a mail50.ntf template and you deploy 200 mail files, then all those 200 mail files can be accessed. Yeah? The icon documents can be accessed as a document by going for that Note ID. That's a known function in Lotus script. And then you do a replace item value on the $flags item, and you can re-enable stored forms, although they were disabled. And then you're back to 0. And the same goes for the database script. Who doesn't know what a database script is? Good, that's positive. What I show with a stored form is a user, a victim, that is opening a single document. You can do the same thing, but then worse if you manipulate the database script of his mail file. Because then the only thing that you need him to do is open his mail file. But you can modify the DB script by, in the back end, don't give the user control yet, but see if there's any mail document that arrived from the attacker. If there has, detach all the payloads and execute it, delete the mail in there, and then give control back to the user. So you have a very automated remote whatever mechanism. The execution control list. As I said, it was introduced in release 4.5 to combat the stored form issue. And basically how it works is you have 3 types of entries that you can specify in the ACL. There is the default entry, there is the no signature entry, and there is trusted signatures. Let me quickly give you a look. Preferences, user preferences, security options. Here is where you can find it. For the default and the no signature, you can specify what types of functionality is allowed. And you can also add particular signatures and specify what they can do. You can do that for workstation security, Java, and JavaScript. So, depending on the code, or depending on the signature with which Lotus Notes design elements were signed, you can specify what is allowed and what is not allowed. The issue with the ACL is that up until release 5.02, so not including 5.02, the default settings in the ACL allowed world access for the default and the no signature entries, which means that if your victim does not have your signature specified in his ACL, you can do anything with his client. Now, because of our talks with Lotus, they have changed that in release 5.02, and they have reversed the situation. Now, nothing is possible unless you specify it. So there's lots of companies out there that end up in trouble when they upgrade from a release 5.0 to a release 5.02 or higher, because their application failed to function, and they have to quickly start deploying ACLs. Without a functioning ACL, stuff like Melissa and Lovebug is possible with Lotus Notes as well. All you need to do is look at the source code for the Lovebug and where it says hook into Outlook, hook into Notes, and you're done. The problems that we see at our customers and in the market is that there's very few users and administrators that understand the ACL concept. And like design elements, ACL settings are also stored in obscure locations. There's 2 types of ACL settings. There is workstation execution control settings, which are stored in your desktop.dsk. But there's also administrative ACLs, which are stored in the names.nsf. They won't appear in a view, but they do have a node ID. And if you sequentially go through the documents, you will find the ACL documents. And again, you can manipulate them with editor access. And as I said before release 5.02, they allow world access. We have noticed that there are 2 ways to reset the ACL at a client. The first one is the refresh ACL formula, which is normally used to deploy administrative ACLs to your clients. If you specify a non-existing administrative ACL in this formula, then it will cause the client to reset its ACL. And in release 4.6, that means wide open. And the second option to reset that ACL is to remove a line called ACL setup equals 3 from the notes.ini. The next time the user starts up his client, he's got to reset ACL. No, it depends, of course, with the formula. With the formula, it depends excuse me, on the ACL settings at that moment. Yeah, but there's, if that is the case, then you could also go in from a file level access and remove that line from the INI file. The interesting thing starts where we discovered that the Notes API calls are not being intercepted by the execution controllers. And this is where it gets extremely dangerous, because the implementation of Olay is built on top of that API. So it means that if we make an Olay call into the Notes client, the ACL won't notice it. Good translation.
So that just to give you an idea, things that use Olay are going to be Visual Basic scripts running in a web browser, hooks in from Microsoft Office documents, or native C code using the Notes C API as well.
Exactly.
So macro viruses, anyone? Visual VB script on a web page, anyone?
I've built a little demonstration for this purpose as well. And let's go back to the intruder. And this time we will create a regular email message to a release 503 client, which is called, yeah, this is him. Demo via HTML. And I will attach an HTML file called a demo.htm. And obviously, that HTML file contains some VB script to make a Olay hook into the Notes client. And we're going to send it to the victim. Okay, now in order to see what happens at the victim, I will restart my Notes 5 client. Oh, and I want to be
Another user.
R5 user. That's what I said, R5 user. Okay. He's got an email as well. And there it is. He received an email. And notice, by the way, that we see a paperclip here. So there's an attachment. That paperclip was not there when we sent the stored form. Let's take a look at the execution control list for this victim. And you will see that default and no signature are not allowed anything. So this is according to Lotus recommendation. Now, if I'm going to launch this page in Internet Explorer, obviously Internet Explorer is going to present a warning for ActiveX. And I didn't do any effort in trying to get rid of that warning. The thing that I want to show you guys is that the ACL is not intercepting the Olay calls. I'm not trying to demonstrate that I can hack Internet Explorer and get rid of the ActiveX warning. So, but in order to make some fun, I just put a prompt in before, telling the user that he should press the yes button if he gets that warning. You see, here's the warning. So, what this demo file will do is it will make a connection to the mail file of the client and give an overview of all the documents that he has in his mail file. Here, this is just a representation of his inbox. Okay? Let me show you the inbox and the fact that it is identical. Okay? So nothing spectacular. Let's go back to the intruder and see if we have some result. Here's the mail file of the intruder, and whoopee, the victim fired off an email. Now, according to the ACL settings, that should not be allowed. Nothing was allowed. And if I open this email, here's what you see. This victim granted manager access as well. That was not allowed according to the ACL. He sent me his HTTP password hash, and he sent me his ID file. And what I can do with that, I will show that to you later. I'm sorry?
Lotus say that that's a feature as well?
I didn't understand your question.
Does Lotus say this is a feature as well?
Lotus recognized this as a problem, but they said, well, that's really kind of a Microsoft problem because it's an Olay problem. And I said, well, but it's your call. It's your Olay call. It's what is it? What's the call? It's like at.
Well, there's 3 calls right now with release 5 because they implemented Domino Object Model kind of thing. You have with the release 4 client, you have the nodes.node session.
Nodes.node session, yeah.
And the nodes.nodes UI workspace, so you can also do stuff in the front end with Olay. And with release 5, they also created the Lotus.node session, which is meant for the server to deal with ASP active server pages. But there is, as a matter of fact, it's a nice question because IBM has produced an entire red book on the combination of VB and Lotus nodes. So you might want to look into that book and see what it does for you. Okay, the next subject is about clearing user preferences. And that in combination with the feature in your ID file that you can share the password within your ID file with API-based programs. I have a demonstration for that as well. So and this time, let's attack the attacker. In going to the ID file properties, there's a little box here that says, don't prompt for a password from other nodes-based programs. And I will show you what this does. Normally, if I don't share that password, this is what you're going to end up with. If I use a program, Nodespeak, who is not familiar with Nodespeak? Okay, Nodespeak is a program that you can use to analyze nodes databases. And it is distributed by the Lotus website. And it's a simple program that uses the Nodes API. And the reason why I use it here is because it's publicly available, everybody can download it, and it proves my point about the API. What you will see is that I think I have to start it up again.
You probably already authenticated once before.
Yeah. So I have to close it down. That's getting tricky. That's what I thought. Don't crash on me now.
Close it.
Nodespeak. Okay, let's try and see what happens if we want to open that server. There you go. This is what I wanted to show. So because my Lotus Nodes ID file is not sharing a password with add-in programs, I will be prompted with this box to provide my password, which can be very irritating, especially if you have a third-party program that continuously goes into your Nodes client, because then you keep on typing your passwords. Okay. Now, here's the trick. If I start sharing that password, okay, I now can work on the server with an API program, NoteSpeak, and I will not be prompted for a password.
Start it up again.
Yeah, okay. I'll start it up again. You'll see, I am not being prompted, which is, this is behavior which is meant to be, because the user wanted to share his password. Now, let's take a look at what happens if I go for a coffee break. Then normally, and this is recommended, you want to press F5, and you see in the bottom area that private user information has been cleared. So this feature is built in so that other people cannot go to your keyboard and send off email on your behalf. Because as soon as you try to do anything on the client, it will prompt you for the ID file password. Here it is, okay? But if you use NoteSpeak on a floppy disk or any other API-based program that you developed, and you go to his workstation, stick it in his drive, start the program, then, and I always make a mistake with this demo. Let me try it again. Where is it? There you go, press F5, user information is cleared. Yeah. Go back to NoteSpeak, and it doesn't work. I think I'm making a mistake.
You gotta pull up Sesame and turn it back on.
Yeah, you're right, sorry about that.
Forgot one step.
Okay. The password is now not being shared, and the user is pressing F5. We have seen that if he shares his password, then you can continue working without the password prompt. And what we saw, what we noticed in the memory of the notes process, is that the sharing flag for that password is just a bit in memory. So if you flip that bit, you can re-enable the sharing of that password. And that's for that purpose we wrote a little program which is called Sesame, which is also not working now, see? There we go. Okay. Here you can see that we can flip that bit in the memory by making it not shared or shared. Yeah? And by doing that, I should now be able, with NoteSpeak, to open that server without a password. And it does. Okay? So I'm now in the mail file of the victim while he thinks he is secure when he goes for coffee. So what this proves is that by using a simple program to manipulate that memory and by implementing some API calls into that Notes client, you can get to his information where you should not be able to. Let's get rid of this. So another thing is that the password remains cached in memory after the user has pressed F5. So it's not clearing his user preferences. It is just flipping a bit. The flag can be changed from an external program, which means that the F5 key is limited to the Nodes GUI, the Nodes interface, the Nodes client only. Off to the next subject, the HTTP password hash. We found that it is based off a modified RC4 implementation, and the passwords are not being salted. So what this means is that a password will always result in a hash that starts with 355E, etc. Same goes for secret, same goes, well, for any combination. So what makes it vulnerable to is brute force or dictionary attacks. If I can get a view on HTTP hashes on a names and address book, I can try and guess some passwords.
Pull up your user view.
Oh, yeah, I can show something about that. Here is an occasion where I was able to look at a names and address book from the web that consisted of 974 users. And I've created this small little database where I could import that particular view into this database and calculate some simple passwords. First name, last name, first character of the first name plus the last name, email address, etc. Just 5 or 6 basic password calculations. And see, here are all the documents. I've anonymized it a bit. And what I found was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 documents that I could immediately identify the password. That's 1%. Too much.
Pull up the user view in a web browser.
Okay.
Just so they can see what that really looks like. You can see it over the web.
If I go to the server here and go to the names.nsf, there is all kinds of views here, but the view that I like most for this information is the $users view. Because what it does, it's a hidden view, but it gives us the names of the users, and if we go way to the right, you'll see the list name and the full name, again the full name, the list name, mail server, mail file, mail domain, his short name, which is his HTTP login name, and guess what comes up here? HTTP password hashes. Okay, and as I told you, I can immediately see that this is password. So what I did is
Let me interrupt you real quick. Where this is actually kind of important, if you actually only have reader access to the name and address book in Domino, and all you've got is reader access. If you've ever noticed when in the HTTP password field, it's actually hidden, so you can't actually see it. The same format, if you pull it up, why don't you show them the default, what I'm talking about, and just click on people. No, just click on people.
yeah, and this is a faster one because otherwise you get all these Java shit. Okay, this is a regular view that you
Yeah, and just click on one of the users.
go for the intruder.
So this is what it actually looks like. So you don't actually even see the password. With only reader access, we would have to actually go in and click on edit to see the HTTP password hash, then it would appear. But what he did with the $users view entry, since it's a hidden view, or supposed to be a hidden view, that reveals all that in clear text. So then we can get the password hash with even if the maximum access we have is reader. So we just bypass the field security that Lotus had actually implemented.
And if you use the read view entries on that particular view, what Kevin explained before, then actually what you're getting is a very nice XML structure where you can immediately parse those HTTP hashes into your Nodes client and perform your calculations. Instead of using question mark open view, you do review entries.
So once you have the XML, since it's kind of, so it's a better defined structure, you can import that into anything else and do a dictionary, a brute force attack, and run that against combinations of what their username is, since we've all seen that in the past. If you saw the Foundstone's terminal server demonstration, one of the things they remarked was that they're seeing terminal servers exposed on the web, people aren't setting passwords, all these things. It's the same thing in Domino, where we're seeing the same exact freaking thing. Everybody's using, stupid passwords made up of the first initial, last name, variations on that.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got a question, Walter.
Yes, and so can I just hide the dollar user from the web browser?
I'm sorry?
Can I just hide the dollar user design element from the web browser?
I don't think you can.
It is already hidden.
No. For the thing is, that just few seconds that you can actually get these
Can you restrict
design
it?
element to keep it from the web browser.
Yeah, what you should do indeed is to restrict access from a web browser, because there's no use in looking at that view.
That's
So-
another HTTP conf.
Exactly, in the HTTP d.cnf file, I would create a redirect for that, yes.
No, but even the design element, we can do that. Right?
Even?
Yeah, even the design element of the wheel.
Yeah, but here's the interesting thing. If you look at the names.nsf, that view is already hidden in the design.
No, but even that's hidden, but the thing is that if you go to the designer,
Okay. Hold on, can I do that? View design. Come on, view design. Oh, I'm not manager here. We go to administrator. Oh, this is not it. Where's the view? Here we are. Okay, now if we scroll down to the views, scroll down more. Yeah, more. Here's the. Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. There you go. Okay. And you want to go here?
No, I think you go in there for the design property of the.
Why don't you come over here and because I don't know what you mean.
Let's see the design properties of that view, I think is what he's saying. So if you go back up one.
When we go up, when you go back,
Yeah, go back to where you were before this.
escape.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes. And then the design tab,
This one?
Third one.
This
There
one?
you go.
yes, you see, you have design of that browser in there.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in this way, people cannot do that from the browser and do that.
And you
Okay.
can see how easy that is.
We can't see that.
Okay, but let me first test this, yeah? Because if you're right, then this should no longer be possible, huh? Let's see what happens. So the users, question mark, open view, right?
Okay. Okay. Now do it with the redirect.
Okay, that's interesting. Did I lose power?
Yeah. Here, check your, see if it's still on. Might have turned off in your pocket.
No, it's on.
I think the battery died. Yeah, he gave us another battery. We lost the battery here.
I think that would help, but as soon as I know the version of your Domino server, I think I still could get into it, because if I know the template, yeah, look at the views here. We go to the $users view. Where is it? Here it is. Go to the properties, and what you will see here is the node ID of that particular view. So I can use the node ID probably to get in there. Okay, let's go back to the presentation.
Before you do that, can you show us what that selection was?
Okay. You go to the view. Let's take this view, for instance. Sorry, I have to go back. And so you stay here, go to the design properties, and on the third tab, you can hide the design element for web browsers. Here's what it says. Hide design element from web browsers.
I've never seen anybody configure that.
Yeah, it's actually a new one for us, but
Sometimes I do that because sometimes I just need to forget some information.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
It's open to talk to users, not to that's how to do it.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
but here again, this is just this is a standard installation of the names and address book, and they've got them all enabled. So.
Okay, yeah, what is important to understand is that from the outside, yeah, you may want to restrict your names.nsf with ACL and with your view property, but what about all your internal users? All the internal users must have at least read access to your names and address book. So any user can go to the people view and look at the document of a colleague. And if you go to the document properties and take a look at the fields in that document, what do you see here? I see the HTTP hash. So all internal users can access all your HTTP hashes. And remote users via the web can do it if you make a mistake in your access control.
Not necessarily.
If during a no, if you install a new user, if you register a new user, you enter the password for that user ID file, and you also get a prompt whether you want to assign an HTTP password as well. And if you do, then you will end up with a situation where the HTTP password is identical to the password that you gave to that ID file. Yes.
Keep going to the next one. I think some of this will
Yeah.
become clearer, because that's actually one of the recommendations that we give to combat the next problem.
It's 12:15. Okay.
Yeah, should I speed up a bit? Are you guys getting hungry? Okay, the ID file is an S subject. If you look at the contents of an ID file, okay, what does the ID file deliver? It delivers authentication for access control. It delivers the digital signature and some encryption, right? If you look at the contents of an ID file, what you will see is an encrypted private and public key. You'll see some user information in there, an expiration date, and some internal integrity checks. And as we've all discussed, it's being used by the Dominoes server, it's being used by the Nodes client, and by API-based programs. There are several features that are built into Lotus Nodes to protect the ID file. There's no way you can brute force the password, because anytime you enter a wrong password, there's an increment in time that you have to wait. The digest of the ID is checked against the server nav. We've seen the F5 and auto log off feature, which is less valuable than some people believe. And we've talked about ID sharing. We've also shown that ID theft can occur from inside your network or outside your network. And we've shown that with the stored form and the HTML sample using Ole. And let's use that example and see if what we can do with that ID file. Would you mind holding this?
Yeah, sure. There's a new battery now.
Okay. In order to show what we can do with the ID file, we have our program Sesame. And in order to make Sesame work, we want to share that ID file. I click on OK. And I have another button here which says password. Okay. And we can either enter the hash corresponding to the ID file into this box, or since we're live now, we can add a new password. So if I use a password A, B, C, and click OK, I have now assigned a new password to this user. Yeah? If I can still use my password, but you can also type in A, B, C. And there you go. You're a validated user. Yeah? If I go back to the position of the intruder, what you will see is that in his mail file, the victim sent him the ID file, which is here, and the HTTP hash. If we supply that into Sesame, we have validated that ID file without a password, without knowing the password.
Switch to that, to do the example, switch to that user ID, and we don't know the password for that.
Okay. Then I will exit the client. Go to here. I need to restart the client. Lotus Notes version 5. Okay. Here it says that we have to enter a password, which we don't have. Let me see. Okay. Share that ID file. Okay. New password. 111.
Sure.
Okay. 111. Okay.
So basically what's happened right here is that that hash and that user ID can be used in combination by taking that hash and plugging it into a known memory register inside the client's memory space. When Notes is going to verify whether or not it has the right information to open up that user ID, which is essentially like opening up your secret key. When you type in your passphrase in PGP, you open up your secret key to get those primes, right? Same sort of thing's happening here. What you're doing is tricking the client into thinking that the hash that you've placed in that memory location is a valid one, and therefore it will open up that ID, allowing you to become that user. The passphrase that you type anywhere, that's just the only thing that does is open up that user ID. All your hidden credentials and all the things that make you important and make you under Notes are the RSA keys that are locked into that user ID. So by tricking the client into opening it, by falsifying the memory information that it's going to use to do that comparison to say, yes, this is the right password, by forcing it to open up that user ID, you've now bypassed that sort of hidden layer. And the reason this works in Notes is because Notes keeps that little bit of information, that little hash, in a fixed memory register that you can go in and look for. You know, you would think that you could use the same sort of attack against other public key implementations like PGP, but Phil Zimmerman was a little smarter than that, and so his credentials, you know, you have like X number of seconds before your key expires. Well, in those X number of seconds, your passphrase information, the thing that it uses to check against, is moving around in memory, so you're not going to be able to isolate it. Well, Notes just shoves it in a particular register and leaves it there, and you can just overwrite it.
If you use a regular memory debugger, and you just can find in the Notes memory process, try to find your HTTP hash, and you will locate it. And go 3 characters back, and you will find the ID sharing flag.
What if the user tries to log in normally after that? His hash will have been replaced.
No. If I can show that to you, yeah, I press F5. If I now go to File Tools ID, I have to provide my password. Remember, the other password was 111, and this is, so it's still there.
So the user doesn't know that you actually check it after the file.
No. And also the victim has sent his ID file and hash way across the ocean towards the intruder without his knowledge. So you now have a nodes client on the other side of the ocean that is able to authenticate against your Dominoes server as the validated, authenticated user.
So you can see how this stuff sort of dovetails together because of improper permissions set on the default user view and improper ACLs on names and address books and people still leaving IDs set on person documents. All this stuff adds together to lead you to the ability to steal an ID, steal a hash file, and then become that user. I mean, it all sort of plays into each other. And with this particular vulnerability, to the way they're checking the hashes in here, there's no easy fix. It's going to involve a redesign when they come out with version 6.
You just lost me here on what you just did here. When you're making this password hash change, are you actually poking into the memory and changing the hash in that memory location?
Yes.
Yes.
So then when the Lotus Notes user is logging in, when the victim is logging in, he's actually authenticating against the Notes server itself
No.
instead of what's in memory.
Well, you're sort of missing one piece here. What you do when you enter that password in on your Notes client is unlock that ID file.
You don't
Then-
authenticate against the server.
Then
You just
Notes
unlock-
uses that data in the ID file when it connects to the server. There's like,
myname.id, it's unlocking that.
right. That's all it's doing is unlocking that. And what we're doing is tricking the client into unlocking that. It's sort of like me guessing your PGP passphrase. Your passphrase doesn't have anything to do with PGP. It's just unlocking your key,
File key, which is where your RSA information is stored.
which is like a bunch of long numbers. So all we've done is trick this thing into opening up the file where all those long numbers are stored, and then when we go request something from the server, that file's unlocked, so it sends the right set of long numbers back out to that server. Does that make more sense? Okay.
Thanks. Okay. You want to take over from this point? Yeah.
So, like we were saying, from this, as you hopefully picked up from this, there's a lot of stuff going on with Notes. A lot of vulnerabilities exist, ranging from basic misconfigurations from install to serious problems in their implementation of encryption technology, to the mechanism in which they perform key management. I mean, there's some serious flaws in the underlying development of security in Lotus Notes. And there's ways to combat this, but they're a little difficult. We keep going on. Obviously, for the server security, you want to make sure that you're blocking out particular things in URLs in the HTTP conf file. There's no reason why you should be able to do particular views. There's no reason why you should look for .nsf with no value. There's no reason why you should be able to look for default navigator views, etc. On server ID files, they recommend no password. That's just ludicrous. If I can steal your server ID file, like we said, I can use that to pull down and locally replicate copies of databases, etc. Some of the other problems with, this is just a summary of the problems. Execution of malicious code, etc., etc. Keep going to keep going up to the final recommendations. Here we go. Rather than flog a dead horse since we're eating in everybody's lunchtime. Obviously, you want to restrict access to the web. You want to restrict views from particular URLs, like we were saying. You want to make sure that you don't store user IDs in the names and address book, because anybody can get them. And while you may try to block access to the names and address book over the internet, the vast majority of your problems aren't going to come from the internet. They're going to come from the guy down the hall who's going to have access to your names and address book. I mean, let's face it. Do you think the CIA's note servers are on the internet? No. Are they accessible to most people who are sitting out there in Langley? Well, yeah. I mean, your problem comes from inside. And like you were saying, like this gentleman back in the back was saying, you want to probably choose different passwords for your ID and for the HTTP password hash, because that way the thing that you're using to unlock your ID file is in no way represented by the information that you can gain out of the HTTP password hash. one good thing that most people don't do is you might want to just store your user ID on removable media, use it when you log in, and then pop it out. That way, someone can't steal it off your machine by you executing malicious code. No one's going to do that, but if you really want to make sure that no one's going to steal your ID by you executing or visiting a web page or opening up a mail attachment and hitting a stored form, that's really one of your only ways to combat that. One of the things that Lotus has recommended is using what they call the strong internet password hash, which obfuscates the password hash a little bit more. And what they've done is they've taken broken RC4 and sort of put another little wrapper on top of it to give it that seed. It's looking like it's some sort of base 64 encoding, and I would imagine probably by the time summer rolls around we'll have that too. But it's still just an extra step, but it at least obscures that data from prying eyes looking at names and address books. Since we know that the sharing of, since F5 doesn't really clear out user credentials, log out. If you're going to get coffee, shut down your Notes browser. Don't leave any of that stuff resident in memory. Don't click on any email attachments, obviously, and unfortunately, sometimes don't open email. You want to enforce strong ACLs on all your databases. You definitely want to restrict anonymous browsing on all your databases, because there's no reason why someone who hasn't authenticated to your server should be able to look at your catalog, should be able to look at your log files, should be able to look at the names and address book, etc. Also, you want to make sure, and this is most important, is you disable stored forms on your mail databases. Because why make it any easier? I mean, it just baffles me, and probably everyone in this room at this point, that we haven't seen the same kind of massive email attacks against Lotus Notes, that since it's so much easier to do under Notes than it is under Windows. It's so much easier. People don't even have to click. They just have to open, thanks to stored forms. So first thing you want to do is go home and make sure those things are turned off on all your mail databases. You want to enforce strong ECLs for all unsigned and untrusted documents. There are ways that we showed that you can set those back, but again, it involves other steps. And if you take all these recommendations and put them into play, you're going to make it a lot harder for people to take advantage of your Notes environment, but it takes a lot of work. And finally, ensure strong host-level security on your Notes servers. All of this stuff is geared towards operating in the Notes environment, but if you're on an NT server and someone whacks you because your administrator account on the NT server is administrator, well, then they'll just go in the Notes data directory and steal stuff without ever having to talk to Notes. Same thing goes if you're running under Solaris. Shut down all those superfluous services and just run Notes on it. There's so many times that we've broken into Notes installations without even having to go through the esoteric problems with Notes. You just sort of sneak around and hit NT or hit Sun or hit somebody else and sneak in through the back way and steal the files natively. Now, for other recommendations, Lotus has a bunch of stuff on their webpage that offers a lot of security advice. It suggests that you use them and keep abreast of things on the security zone, and keep watching for stuff like this. As we said, we're supposed to be working on a paper this weekend. Hopefully it'll be out soon that will sort of detail this in much greater information and outline the fixes a lot better than we're able to cover in 90 minutes. But you should also take some initiative on your own and assess your own level of security, and look for other people who are, if you're not that comfortable in Notes, look to have other people in Notes come in and help you out. These guys here are probably two of the best Notes security experts in the world, so if you're interested in having someone take a look at your environment, you should call them. And hit it again. And this is where we are. They're Trust Factory, I'm with SDI, and we all know who Lotus is. So I think now we can go eat lunch. Just so that everybody knows, back